Well, it was a bit of a dilemma. How much do I cover, and with what detail? If I only give headlines without explanation, it will be like lots of questions. So I decided to put explanations, but I will not read them now, of course. That will take too long. It will be first a PDF introduction, then a short video to give you a sense of a scale in science from the biggest to the smallest, thanks to Father Reddy. Then more detail, a PDF, then cute video by Carl Sagan. That's really nice, and then just short conclusion and questions. So, well, I called it a hole in the wall. And by coincidence, on the same day, I got an email from Toronto Outdoor Club naming the event Hole in the Wall. I'm not sure why. How did it happen? I have it, just spooky. So I try to make as much reference to Mother Maria, and as it is relevant. But the first question is, what margins? We are saying a church or the margins. So, well, the margins here are not the poor in money or health or alienated from society or imprisoned behind bars, but actually a whole generation which has all these things regardless of the affluence. Like my kids, our Sunday school kids, at my church 35 years ago, it was full. How many of them are left today who go to church? Only one or two. And once Father Reddy mentioned that maybe we should have more activity at U of T, we should have more people. Well, U of T has how many? Over 60,000, 65,000. I believe the total number of all the students who go to all chapels combined wouldn't reach 60. That's 1 per 1,000. What about the remaining 99.9%? And even the 1 per 1,000 who go, are they really comfortable with their faith? Well, the story is very much like the Titanic. Christianity, once my priest said, Christianity is like a big ship, better than being on some small boat of New Age or whatever. I said, yeah, okay, great. But that big ship hit the iceberg of nihilistic science, mechanistic, nihilistic science. Nihilistic, like it doesn't ask why, it asks how. That's it, and there is no reason, whatever. And deterministic, bang, 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 is like clockwork, that's it. So with that kind of thing, there is nothing left in Christianity to do, or to any other faith. It was a severe crash, so I use symbolic to say that most people fell off the ship of faith. The lucky who think they are lucky ended up in the dingy boats of New Age, like the spirituality kind of thing they take poses and whatever. But others, the atheists, were right out there in the frigid waters of the soul, sucking life out of their souls. While the die-hard Christians barricaded themselves in their cabins, closed the doors, and they thought everything will be fine. But of course, when the whole thing sank, they will be crushed. And unfortunately, there were clumsy responses going on. At best, what church did was some reformers, we know, who were shuffling the furniture around Titanic to make it stabilize somehow. And there are the traditionalists who stuck to their rituals as if nothing happened, and the two bumping with each other on a sloping surface. It's a kind of tragic and funny. It would be really funny if it wasn't so tragic. And then here come the wolves, the opportunist attackers, atheists. Now I have here the cover of the American Atheist, celebrating 50th anniversary in 2013, and this is the leader of it, the chief atheist, and the Herr Dollar will be saying, "In God we do not trust." And they are saying 50 years of reason, and look how reasonable they are, how scientific, God bless them. They have the symbol of the atom, they are atomic people. But what they don't know, how silly it is, that atom, that figure never exists. It's a funny cartoon that was abolished in the year 1915 when science advanced a bit and the quantum mechanics found that you cannot draw the atom, it will be really a cloud. So it shows you their ignorance even in their boasting. And those people, when I read the magazine, clearly they know nothing about science. Maybe nothing more than high school, and high school is limited to classical, as you will see. So it's war against atheists, and that bring to mind the words of Mother Maria of World War II. I mean, war is war. There is something in war that constitutes our only chance. That does not mean we should want it, but once it has broken out, it should be made use of. Actually, the same thing here, as you will see, there will be a lot of enrichment of Christianity because of this war. Many old theological questions that are difficult become very clear now because of the effort put. Now, there are brave scientists for Christ, I will come to some of them later, who came to the rescue to mend the gaps in the hull of the ship of Christianity, working at the very foundation of it without being even noticed. I will come to them in more detail later. And how this catastrophe changes what's meaningful. Mother Maria said on something similar, the gates have suddenly opened onto eternity. All natural life has trembled and collapsed. Yesterday's laws have been abolished. Now we will see it in modern physics, abolished. Desires have faded, meaning has become meaningless, and another incomprehensible meaning has grown wings on their backs. New meaning appeared. We will see now. And really, it's a huge revolution happening. So here, an example, Scientists for Christ. There was this symposium 11 years ago at Wheaton College for Christ and His Kingdom. I'm sure there are other symposiums as well, but I'm not keeping track. There were 4 scientists in string theory and multiverse. The one on top left is Canadian, from Waterloo University, Robert Mann, who had a paper online called Physics at the Theological Frontiers. And here under them, their qualifications, fine print, but it is legible if you magnify it. And here description of what each one talked about, but to sum it up in a few lines, the common theme is that string theory, string M theory, M is the overall, the mother of Miller theory, about the multiverse, multi-universes, is compatible with the Christian theology, and one of them said God as multiple universe generator. Another's looking for deep understanding of existence with ontological arguments. Now suddenly we have ontological arguments as well. Well, disclaimer here. I'm making disclaimer as not to give big promises. It's very essential, because otherwise it could backfire and lead in the wrong direction. So here it is. It's only a hole in the brick wall, and the brick wall of the impeccable science that maybe we were all taught in high school that everything follows equations exactly accurate. And basically it says that the laws of nature explain everything, at least in principle, that evolution, according to Darwin, negates any creation by God, and that the question should not be why it happened, but how. That's all what counts. Like, there's no purpose to anything, so stop asking why. That's it. So that stands against faith. Now, if your heart is into faith, but somebody gives you all of these things, say, oh, this is for the feeble-minded and whatever, so you feel that you are banging your head against a brick wall. And what here I hope to do is to make a hole in the wall. So first, the mechanistic deterministic science really is quite old. Started by, I mean, at least took good shape by Newton in the 1600s, matured fully by the end of the 1800s. But it's still the dominant one in culture today. They think it should be forever. While modern science from 1900 till today, quantum physics, as you will see, have lots of uncertainty. Quantum physics ranging with other applications in it, like there is quantum consciousness, quantum evolution, theory of dissipative structures, and other things. These constitute a hole in the wall. But the hole in the wall is, all what it gives you is just darkness, like mystery. That's it. So that now your faith is free. But remember, all this argument is a skeleton. Now we're talking about the philosophers. In my opinion, anything rational, whether it's philosophical, scientific, quantum scientific, and rational theology included, are really skeletons. There is no life in any reason whatsoever. Life and reason don't mix. But reason is a skeleton. Without it, you become jellyfish. And jellyfish doesn't survive much. It will be drifting with the current and eaten by any predator. So you need both. This presentation will be part of the skeleton, while the rest has to be on your own. So here it is. Quantum theology can free you from the restriction. Here is the skeleton, can take you from the brick wall into a broken brick wall. But only the cross, the way of the cross, can show you light in the middle of that darkness through the hole. And that's what actually, that's really my story personally. I was first an atheist from age 12 onward because Darwin and what have you, like there were many like that, continued. But I worked hard at it. I want to prove it, so I went into physics, and then quantum physics punched a hole in the wall, but that didn't give me faith. It was just really darkness, like, wow, I don't know. And then personal experience due to extreme hardship, multiple catastrophes, showed the light. And that experience, as described by many who happen to have it, one of them, Saint Simeon, the new theologian, or any brief form, Laplace, it will be something like basically about the ultimate reality and meaning. Light filled everything. Like imagine it starting from that dot of light in the darkness, and then it exploded to cover the whole cosmos, everything. It can't be described, it can't be put in words, so one shouldn't elaborate much on it, should work through work, let the fruit of it give results. But Mother Maria has experienced eternity, and it seems her experience survived, unlike others I will come to later, because she was practicing it. She was living. I don't think I have to read all of it, but just some. And I think that anyone who has at least once felt himself in this eternity has at least once realized what path he is following. The companion bearing the cross. So, it seems her experience of eternity is more stable than that of others because she is living it. And this is testimony to her. So now, this is the end of the introduction. So after it, the plan is to show you a video, smiling face, showing a range of scale from the biggest to the smallest. Try to keep track of it. It will be stunning how many orders of magnitude it shows. Then after that, I'll go back to presentation, brief introduction of quantum physics, highlighting the increasing apophatic feature, and then selected examples where quantum physics have theological results, dissipative structure theory by Pigogene, and the triumph of life. Then here's the important thing, the other world. Is there another world? This is very important, really. Without it, we'll be in trouble. Christianity is about other life. Then salvation as taking psychological symbols, and then Carl Sagan's lovely video. So that showed us the range of scale involved. The smallest was the quarks, that will be 10 to the power minus 15 of a meter. The nucleus will be 10 to the power minus 14, so this is 10 times smaller. While the biggest they can observe is 10 billion light years, but by reasoning they are in the multiverse and so on, they start talk about hundreds of billions of light years or maybe infinity and whatever. But on the smaller one, that's the smallest matter. However, what's smaller than that, we'll come to it later, is the fabric of space. Much, much smaller, but still finite. So now here elaborating a little more, classical science as the brick wall. So like I said, by the end of the 19th century, science was thought to be perfected into deterministic clockwork view of the universe, especially the words of Laplace, famous mathematician. He said, that's it, the world works like a machine. Everything is predictable if we have enough data. If we don't have data, that's the only reason, but otherwise, in principle, everything is known. Then came the Maxwell equations in electrodynamics in the late 1800s, and also they were very sharp equations, give you accuracy like huge. I think 15 orders of magnitude, huge. So by the end of the 1800s, about 1880 or so, somebody there, some scientist in France, I wonder if it was Laplace, said, now we really know everything. That's it. There's nothing more to know. That's it. And the irony is, on the same year he said it, Dalton came with the theory of the atom, which was a little different. And then they start to notice funny observations about the speed of light, tests of Michelson and Morley and so on. I didn't mention it here, which later brought theory of relativity, but worst of all was the black body radiation. Anyways, science became like a brick wall at that point, and atheism flourished at the time. That's when Karl Marx came. And they called it thinking out of the box. Like, to be an atheist is to really think out of the box. And that was a prerequisite to being illuminated. He is an illuminated guy. He thinks out of the box. He is an atheist. And the French Revolution before that was already ahead of them in it. And still, it dominates the secular society today. And unfortunately, I meet some professors at U of T who still live at the time of the horse and buggy, at the time of these equations. Here, the Trinity College, like in the mid-1800s, had horse and buggies outside. And there are some professors who still belong to that period. They are totally unaware of what's happening. Anyways, then here come the then here the fool's paradise comes to an end. You have no idea how much shocked they were. It all started with something simple. Max Planck was an electrical engineer working on the newly invented light bulb. We don't have light bulb here. And they were a bit yellowish. He said we wanted a little whiter than that. Maybe we increase the voltage where it works, but it didn't happen. So they tried to research it. They got a black body, which is basically a block with a hole in it, and the hole has a tiny tunnel out, very tiny. When they heat it, it glows, and the light inside it bounces back and forth and emit lights from it. To understand how can we increase the blue light, the short wave, to make it whiter. So they calculated equations of it, and they expected a certain spectrum of light, like how much of the red light, how much of the blue, how much of the violet, how much of the ultraviolet. They drew the graph that's expected, then they measured it And the red light was almost right. The blue a bit deviated. The violet deviated more, but the ultraviolet, wow, was a catastrophe. They got 1/10 of what they expected. Imagine they made an error, what, 1,000%? They called it the ultraviolet catastrophe. And they checked the calculation, they checked worldwide, and they got the same thing. And then Max Planck, just, I don't know, we stumbled across that just by chance. He said, instead of adding up all the wavelengths in continuous as it should be, I will choose some, this but not that, this but like, I will choose some, this and that, but nothing in between. And bingo, with that, it fit. But there is no explanation for it. Anyways, others checked it, they agreed with him, he got Nobel Prize. He made the research in 1904, got Nobel Prize 1918. But why is it so that those wavelengths have to jump with nothing in between? Einstein came and said, it's because light come in lumps. We call them quanta. So they gave him Nobel Prize for it. And then the question is, why do they come in lumps now? So it's like they are kicking the can down the road, really. And then the one after him, Niels Bohr, said, that happens only if electrons are confined to certain shells around the nucleus, here or here or here, but nothing in between. They jump suddenly, and when they jump suddenly, they give a photon. Okay, yeah, that explains it. He got Nobel Prize. But why do they jump? Now, we changed the lumpy into jumpy. So why? And then came de Broglie, said, because it's wavy. It has to fit an equal number of waves around. So he got Nobel Prize on it. But wait a minute, a wave of what? And then came Heisenberg, or then ultimately came the uncertainty principle, Erwin Schrödinger. Schrödinger, 1927, said this wave is a wave of probability of finding the electron, or in this case, of finding the particle, electron or other things. And so electron has a wave of probability of what? Of finding it, because it can be really anywhere. It's more like a cloud everywhere, and the probability. So it was very confusing. Albert Einstein called it confusing. And a famous theoretical physicist, Brian Greene, called it weird, while Richmond Feynman, who is very important guy, called it absurd. All the subatomic particles follow diagrams, carry his name, Feynman, and he got Nobel Prize too. They called it absurd. So it wasn't a happy situation. So there is some kind of blessedness in the ignorance. Like I would say, the top scientists are using words like weird, absurd, confusing, etc., which is at least a sign of humility. They stopped saying that they know it all. Well, Mother Maria had testimony to humility, say, blessed are the poor in spirit. I'm sorry, poor in spirit, this is Matthew 5:3. She said the vow of non-possession can and should be expanded to the spiritual domain, like be humble. At least we started now to see scientists like Albert Einstein himself saying he's confused. While before that you have somebody much smaller than him, Laplace, saying, oh, I know it all. So they are changing. And there was a reward for it, for this humility. Physics became far more powerful in a practical way. Like they made the nuclear energy, not that all of it is good, but they did lots of important things because they admitted that they don't know everything. And Mother Maria has words for that. Thus, the virtue of non-possession, spiritually understood, should make a person open to the world and to people. She takes it from point of people, but scientists took it open to new applications by just abandoning their dogmatic insistence on that everything should be explained. Now here, before going any further, I would like to see at least the similarity in it, in that the universe, the Big Bang theory, almost right away started by being granulated into particles, broken into particles, but that's what you would see in the Ponticrator fingers touching at a point, as if the divine finger and the earthly finger touching at a fine point, and the universe emerged from a fine point and then got granulated. Now here, some relevant outcomes of a quantum physics. First, God the Creator. Where does it come from? There is something interesting about a quantization of time and a quantization of space, in that applying the theory of relativity of Einstein to very small dimensions generates very high forces, very high gravitational force, which, if we go smaller than a certain distance, the force will grow so huge that it will form a black hole that will destroy the device. So it can't be measured, and that distance is 10 to power minus 35 of a meter. Remember, the quark was like 10 to power minus 15. This is much, much smaller. Now, similarly can be said about a clock. A clock, the unit of time happens when something moves between 2 points, like the old pendulum goes like this, or your watch has an atom vibrating. So the shortest possible time is to take the shortest possible distance and cross it with the fastest thing, which is light, and that will be equal to 10 to minus 43 of a second. Again, if you try to measure less than that, a black hole will emerge and destroy the device. So you cannot measure less than this time, which means you can't keep going, putting time smaller and smaller and smaller. You have to stop there. So what does it mean? It means the flow of time in the universe is not uniform. It's really come and go. It's appear and disappear, very much like what happens with your video. You take a video on your cell phone, and it will be taking 30 frames per second. And when you load them on the computer, you would say, oh, well, these frames are almost the same, but not exactly. So how come they fit well together? And then you conclude that there is a reality beyond the frames, that there was something before that. So how come they fit together? They appear and disappear. I mean, disappear means gone. And then it shows up again, and it shows again fitting well. So who fitted well? You start to think, okay, I mean, here, at the very least, we can say to atheists, you can't answer that question. So from this point on, it's a matter of belief. You believe what you want, I believe what I want, at least we are equal. This is the point. It to be on equal basis, I say I will choose to believe that somebody is recreating it, and in this case, constant creation. The other thing, string theory is really very interesting, and there are good reasons for it. It's not like such a fantasy. They found that the masses of particles, elementary particles, happen to be proportionate to each other, as if they are strings, vibrating strings. Okay, but what kind of strings are they? Like made from what? Horse hair or steel or what? They are not made from any material, because any material we have has atoms, and the atoms and their particles are the energy of the vibration of strings. The strings are not any matter we know. And the other question, those strings, what are they wrapped on? I mean, strings like strings of violin have to be wrapped on something. So quantum physicists had to ultimately assume certain geometrical shapes, like configurations in the structure of the universe, very tiny things, so very complex, that are six-dimensional, where the strings are wrapped on them and the strings vibrate, and the vibrations create our world. Now those shapes are called Kalabiyao, I guess the name of the persons who created them. The dimensions are equal to that smallest dimension. I mentioned earlier 10 to power minus 34 of a meter. That's called Planck dimension, after Max Planck. So the picture it's emerging is that there are strings on like some shape, and those strings vibrate, and the energy of their vibration is us. So imagine a situation if the tunes from a violin started to speak to each other and discover that they must have come from something like a violin, but they have no clue what the violin is. They are the sound, they are not the device. So what is there at that higher reality, and who is, and why are they vibrating? Is there somebody giving them energy to vibrate? What for? By the way, in the Bible, there are the six-winged angels who sing ceaselessly in Isaiah and Revelation. And those angels have their wings curled, six curled wings, and those are six curled dimensions. Okay, I'm not saying these are angels, but just the coincidence is really funny. Other applications, the Unitrinity. Now this is a big issue, especially with people who don't believe in a Trinity. And I used to have lots of arguments with them. It's interesting. Imagine if I tell you that 99.97% of your body is made out of Unitrinity. So once I had an argument with somebody arguing against it, I said, you are made 99.97% of your body is made of Unitrinity, and the hot air getting out of your mouth is also 99.97% made of Unitrinity. So you are doomed, that's it. Now, so now this is the story. When you keep going in particles smaller and smaller, we reach the quarks. Now that video showed you they reach quarks and stopped. Basically every neutron and proton made out of three particles. And those particles are equal in weight, at least in the case of the nucleus, our particles. They have different characteristics, but of the same nature, the same essence, but different character. In this case, the character is called a color, three colors. And they don't bump with each other, but they stay close. And if you pull one of them away, the other two follow. So here in the page after, actually here the diagram at the bottom shows, this one. The diagram at the bottom shows why you can't separate them, what happens. I wouldn't go into the detail, but they fulfill very much the relationship that the Holy Trinity has. They act as one, but they are free within their range. They are different character, but same essence. But this model also offers something else. Offers a reason to believe why it is necessary to have Unitrinity rather than just one. The quarks are united by an enormous force. It's the greatest force in nature, and a little bit of it spills out of their confines. That tiny bit creates the so-called strong force that keeps the nucleus together. As you know, the protons in the nucleus, positive and positive, can actually expand. So they need a special force to keep them together. And this is the strong force, which comes from originally from what holds the quarks together. Now, if a quarks collapse on each other, then the strong force will disappear and the nucleus will simply explode and there will be no world as we know it. In parallel to the Holy Trinity, it's bound together by a huge love which spills out a little bit into the world, which gives love in the world. If the three persons of the Holy Trinity collapse on each other, by similar analogy, you can expect love in the world to disappear. And societies that don't have it, you can look at their condition. The other thing about the cosmic cross, is there a cosmic cross? Is there universal cross? Well, those geometric shaped I mentioned go into tears in them, and to be mended they need a string to be located at the right location at the right time. And somebody gave it an example. He said, imagine you are bombarded by a cluster bomb, and the only thing protecting you is a hula hoop that keeps going up and down to bounce those shrapnels. That's what somebody proposed. That's the only explanation. And the question is, what's really causing it to be at the right place at the right time? Some scientists say the hula hoop, this is a string, sniffs the right location. Okay, you can believe that, but there is no proof of anything sniffing anything. Or you can believe that there is God which is taking care of you. And if that's the case, then God is working all the time, overtime, to protect everyone. It's interesting, Salvador Dali had that cross made of 8 cubes, which happened to be the expansion of a 4-dimensional cube on our world. Like in our world, if you get a cube, if you get this cube, suppose a cube, you open it, it gives you 6 squares, around 6 squares, right? The 4-dimensional cube has 8 cubes of our world. How did Salvador Dali know that? I don't know. The 4th dimension means including time. So anyway, interesting. Mother Maria has a word, finally feeling God's overwhelming presence. God is over all. And well, she knew with certainty, unique and explaining everything. Now, how about the virgin birth? Again, we can venture on so many things. Well, quantum physics allows lots of things. Now, this is really pushing it. It's basically saying, without going into details, it's saying it's possible, even though very, very tiny probability, but not impossible. Okay, I'm not going to elaborate, you can read it all. And Mother Maria, well, identified, I suppose, with the Virgin Mary, at least, when she felt she is a mother for all. Another thing, dual nature of Christ, for those who find it strange. Remember, light has a dual nature, and when scientists accepted it, well, why not accepting dual nature of Christ? Determinism, back to determinism. Hawking's who did lots of work on black holes, said when a black hole sucks matter in it, it crushes everything, destroys its quantum numbers, destroys all information, and that's totally lost. If information is not guaranteed to stay, then determinism cannot happen. There is another one who really put an end to determinism, Prigogine. He got Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1977. He is famous with the theory of dissipative structures, and his work on complex entities like the brain. The brain interchanges so much, has so many neurons in it that interchange energy so much. It becomes so complex that determinism falls apart. Anyways, he was a big champion against it, and he came with the idea, and he proved that from chaos you can have life. It's reversal of the usual law of thermodynamics that chaos keeps increasing. Now here, without going too much details, but just briefly, in that quantum evolution. Well, evolution is there, the fossils are there, but the Darwinian explanation that it's by random and then selection of the fittest would take forever to happen and cannot happen. What we notice, the fossils have big gaps between them at every level. And now the search for fossils have been going on for a long time, and the gaps haven't been bridged, which led them to believe that there are quantum leaps in evolution. Quantum leaps are there, huge leaps. Like before the human, there were apes and there was nothing in between. So Prigogine tried to show by science that how it can evolve by any rational way. He worked hard and he couldn't. So that leaves one thing. You have to assume the presence of the Holy Spirit, in that it's the life, as we say, the life-giving mystery, in this case, the life-giving uncertainty. Now, the other world, here it is. Is there another world? In the past, the other world was that above the clouds, where people can't go, so you have to assume that. Now people fly above the clouds. So shall we abandon the other life? Well, I will be proposing here that it is above the speed of light, another world. I will come to it in a moment. I personally really wanted to find a way about where is the other life. Like it's so important. Jesus say, have treasures in heaven, don't have treasures here. And so eschatology is very important to Christianity, and if that's gone, it's gone. And I have listened to some sermons where the priest says of another church, say, well, the important thing is that it's the heaven within you, that's it. So people are abandoning the talk about the other life. Well, Mother Maria here talked passionately about the other life, about the clouds getting out of the chimney and going to other life, etc. But we need something. Now, the clue came when someone introduced me to the work of a guy called Pope, who worked on DNA connection with light. And that is interesting because light happened to be the only thing that connects us with the world that's beyond the speed of light. I'll come to it in a moment. Could it be a boundary between the two? Now here is the thing. Albert Einstein mused about it a long time ago. He said if we plug in these equations are mass, time, and length. If we plug velocity greater than speed of light, we can end up with another world where it will be as impossible to slow down to speed of light as it is for us impossible to accelerate to the speed of light. There are other scientists who recently did research on it, but I didn't have to list it. But the interesting thing is this, though. Everything you get will be multiplied by square root of -1, which is the imaginary number. And that means nothing of that world can be seen here except its beginning, that's light. I will come to more graphs later. Now, if we plugged, I'm not sure what you can get out of this graph. Sorry, these are the equations drawn to scale. There is a spike up there, that's the mass. When you accelerate, the spike is speed of light. When you accelerate to speed of light, the mass will grow infinite. You have to put infinite energy, which you cannot do. On the other side, to the contrary, those who try to slow down to it will spike to infinity. You can take your time to follow it. It's something interesting, but everything on the right is multiplied by the imaginary number. It's imaginary. In other words, you can't see it from this world. Only light is the only boundary. And it seems to me fitting with what we hear about, in that God shows as light, his energy light. But beyond that, he's a total mystery. Now, there is something appealing about it. In our number theory, we have real numbers. This is the green circle. And then we have complex numbers where we add to them the imaginary numbers. And that graph shows you the two together. I wouldn't elaborate much. And here a wave of electromagnetic wave. It shows you both electricity and magnetism, two waves perpendicular to each other, one of them multiplied by the imaginary number. So here I elaborated on more features of it. You can read it. It seems to fit with what we think about heaven. It can have movement that never ends, unlike our world. Everything is infinite in it. And maybe best representation, Susan, thank you for this. And Susan drew the vertical surface, but like I mentioned, two worlds, and the vertical is the other world, which is what Susan wanted to draw, happened to exactly matching. And the line between them should be the line of light. The vertical surface is smooth because the other world is continuous, while the horizontal, Tushi told me that this means structure, but structured because it's broken in the first place. And so our world is a broken world, the other is uniform, and the two are perpendicular. There is more to do on the issue on this research with DNA. Now, how do you cross the speed of light? You don't. DNA already in touch with light. So that's the issue. Now going to human application. There is something coming on CBC, this shape on the lower left about the brain, the two halves of the brain. Half of it is like a machine and half is green life. It's like, you know, the two halves of the brain, one logical, one life-oriented. And the other sketch I had is from a psychology book. It shows you that there is the unconscious mind where it is about feelings. And it is about feelings, which is most likely to connect with light, and light is the entrance to the other world. So once again here I have symbolic that the rational mind, you think of it as the skeleton, and the unconscious mind, the green leaf. Now here the two minds are different. The rational mind is linear in space and time. I'm sorry, it's a very fine print. While the unconscious mind is outer space. It's very much like a baby. The baby doesn't understand, when you tell the baby later, a little later, doesn't understand what later is. The unconscious mind have no space and time in it. And how to connect the two? Through God and man. His humanity connects with our, and his behavior in the world connects with our rational mind, and his divine connects with our unconscious mind. Here there is a line in between, again from Book of Psychology, that a barrier between the two. And so we are like in a Faraday cage, trapped from communicating within the brain itself, and only through faith in Christ. Now, Mother Maria here focuses on it, says, all right, that's what it is, but you see the face of Christ in the people that he identified with. So at a practical way of salvation, that's what she does. And it's a long path, but basically connecting the divine world with life through light, and that will be particularly in the unconscious mind, which is alienated from our conscious mind. The two can connect best when we believe in a dual nature Christ. And that basically to prove to somebody who is outside of Christianity of why it helps them, the outsiders, to connect within themselves at least. And after it, we ask, the second question is, how do you internalize Christ? And Mother Maria says, through helping people. So that's the end of the PDF, and now there is Carl Sagan.
That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives. The aggregate of our joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines, every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there, on a mote of dust, suspended in a sunbeam. The earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by all those generals and emperors, so that in glory and triumph they could become the momentary masters of a fraction of a dot. Think of the endless cruelties visited by the inhabitants of one corner of this pixel on the scarcely distinguishable inhabitants of some other corner. How frequent their misunderstandings. How eager they are to kill one another. How fervent their hatreds. Our posturings, our imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. The Earth is the only world known so far to harbor life. There is nowhere else, at least in the near future, to which our species could migrate. Visit? Yes. Settle? Not yet. Like it or not, for the moment, the Earth is where we make our stand. It has been said that astronomy is a humbling and character-building experience. There is perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known.
Well, Carl Sagan is an astrophysicist, and he asked NASA to direct the probe that visited several planets, and as it was exiting the solar system, asked them to turn the camera towards Earth and take one last shot, and that was the dot. So he made this about it. Yeah, well, now our questions, and this is a quote from Mother Teresa. So basically, those who seek glory through expansion and going out in space and what have you, that's not possible. Any dream of actually living on the moon or on Mars, forget about it. You can't keep living all the time in spacesuit. This is the only place you have, and the only way to connect with the infinite is through the other life, which is connected to life. You are capable of connecting from within, but any other delusion that science gives us, let's go and fly and forget about the Earth, we can go somewhere else. Just forget about it. That's a leftover from the past. Now we have questions here. See what you think. I have 3 questions, and if you have time for the 4th, will be great. What issues related to science, whether real or perceived, are obstacles to the faith? Any idea what things in science can be obstacles to faith? I touched on some, but there are others.
I think what you're saying is just a lack of current knowledge of science is the main one.
Yeah, you are talking about basically deterministic science. That's one. Yeah. Deterministic science is the problem, the obstacle to faith. But there are other things that are pretty serious.
I think there's become a soteriological view of science.
Yeah.
That science is and will be the source of our salvation. What it lacks, there is the relational reality. And I think there's this sort of, especially when it comes to technology, this sort of dependence that technology will make a better human being, will create flourishing, will end poverty, will end disease, and will make this sort of utopia in which we can all live in equality. And it's an illusion, because it's based on a presumption that relationship is not the cure, but
Yeah.
activity.
There is also, well, yeah, please.
I think there's a basic question always of the use of what we discovered, and it's a question of ethics, I think, that it seems to be neutral, but what we do with it isn't neutral.
Yes, you mean all this war going on. How about, tell me, how about scientism, false use in New Age? In a New Age.
Say that again.
Any idea?
Sorry, scientism,
False use of it.
Oh, false
in
use.
New Age.
In New Age. Like, okay. Have you seen some prophets of the New Age who bring in quantum physics and throw it in allegedly quantum physics, and they make a mockery out of it, and people don't know? They are abusing even this one. Have you seen the that video that went around called The Secret, How to Be Rich? How to be rich by having the forces of nature converging on your wishes and helping you. And then they brought even quantum physics in it somehow. So there is basically quakery going on.
Quackery.
Quackery.
The Quakers.
I'm sorry, oops, no, I
Sorry, I haven't
don't.
caught up to quantum physics yet.
I don't mean. Yeah.
Still writing
So,
notes.
so we have what's happening in schools, the issue of classical.
Someone is not muted there. But that's Mike.
That's okay. Well, any other idea about this question before I go second?
The big issue that I see is limits to knowledge and perception. Science and atheism may state a position of being against religion, but they've turned into religions.
Yeah.
But putting man and rationality in the center that belongs to God, and not admitting that perhaps there are things that are unknowable.
Yeah, that's what that's the brick wall mentioned. But of immense trouble is, well, perhaps what Madonna covered it very nicely. She said she is very much into science, and that's why she watches Star Wars. So it tells you, well. Now, other issues, anything related to the church, anything that happened by clergy or church that undermine Christianity?
Where do you start?
We don't have long enough for that
Exactly.
question.
How do you define church?
Christianity. Church, I said the clergy or churches.
I'd say to closeness to relationship. Closeness. Shutting down.
Enclosed, this is one. Being enclosed, yes. Other thing that are making news?
I think in some cases, you can get, I'll use the term that I came up with, the mercenary mystics who ply trade in transformation, but it's an illusionary transformation that's only there for power.
Ah, yeah.
Right, and
Yeah, oh
and
yeah,
it's-
that's true.
you see a lot of that expanding into sort of the spiritual movement, right? Where there's this trade in mystical experience, but it's extremely systematic and programmed and sold as a commodity. And I think it undermines people's sort of commitment or belief in the church as the body, something that you belong to, something that you are enmeshed in. Rather, it becomes sort of this very personal, individualistic experience of transformation without the need of the other. And
we have some names like Hannah Hen, who started in Toronto. Somebody started from my church, but then he didn't survive in it. Called Hannah Hen. So he went to US and he became a big guy, one of those who made millions. And we have, of course, the pedophiles, which is making news. Because this whole issue is how to combat the decline of interest in Christianity. We have to address all angles. Yeah.
I see two big issues related to the church. One is confusion of what is the unchanging truth that we are meant to pass on and what are our personal preferences. Being able to distinguish what is legitimate diversity of cultural expression and what is error. And the other thing is being, I think you touched on it in your presentation near the beginning, clinging too much to some traditions that maybe have served their purpose. And if I could quote a Catholic theologian, Thomas O'Meara, in his book Theology of Ministry that I studied in a previous course, one of his questions was, must the church be like all the institutions of civilization, become an antique? Will it spend, as it has in the past, decades in antiquarianism or self-parody? Because once the tradition stops growing, it ends up dying. So we have to find a balance of knowing what to preserve, what is still relevant, and knowing when we should adapt to the changing culture without losing what is our core identity.
Indeed.
And the church very often will, say for the United Church and Greta Vosper, be too much of an adapter, and other churches cling sometimes too much to things that are no longer relevant.
Yeah, valid point, and a tough, maybe.
A tough,
what you advise.
a tough line
point.
to
A tough
discern.
Well, it does get back to the question of what is church, because I would argue that people like Greta Rosberg are actually rebelling to maybe a falsehood of what is church. In other words, her atheism is truly atheistic in terms of, if you would ask her what her church believed in, she's an honest broker of what that church may represent. That would be my experience.
But if she still wants to claim to be a Christian minister and an atheist, I'm not sure I really see the honesty in that. But
well,
that's a big tangential.
I'm saying she's responding to what the lack of that within an organization, perhaps. That's all. And if you can't define church in terms of that perpetuation of the underlying conviction, whatever the tradition or whatever the thing that moves it, then is it really church? That's the question I think you have to ask yourself, because if it lies outside, does pedophilia lie within the church or outside the church? Those are the questions that would define church, in my opinion. So I don't know. Where do you posit church in your question?
Well, those pedophiles are priests.
But
officially are priests.
Somebody who is nominally a priest and a pedophile within the church. You see, this is what I'm getting at.
Where the boundaries are.
Pardon me?
You're saying like where the boundaries are.
Well, or somebody are all ordained priests who are pedophiles church, part of church? I don't know. This is an interesting question.
Categories.
So I attended a symposium last week at St. Mike's, 2 weeks ago, and it was called something along the lines of looking at the wounded church. And there was an idea that emerged in the symposium by the theologian that opened the symposium, and he talked about the church as a body that is both holy and sinful, and that is journeying towards healing along everyone in it. So, journeying towards healing with Christ. It's the idea of the church as a pilgrim. So, I don't know if that helps answer your question. It's still a paradox.
Well, it's a big issue, but just to keep it alive, I mentioned it. Now, the one after, what world events and situations are obstacles to Christianity?
The death of empire, the falling apart of empire is when the church has so often been intertwined with empire. And I think that's what's happening now.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Okay.
I think I'm of the opinion that that the idea of God and God's control and care and ability to sustain the world was severely damaged by the events of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, when the world realized that that we were the force that could destroy us.
It's terrible.
And I think it really challenged and undermined this idea that God is ultimately in control. And now, because now human beings have the power in their own hands to exterminate life. And I think it really had a significant impact on the church's message of God's compassionate love and continued care for the world.
Yeah, there is another dimension to it which is not widely known, but it's shocking, about Nagasaki. First, Hiroshima was bombed because of the weather condition they chose, but Nagasaki, you'd be shocked because it's Christian. Why? The Japanese who escaped from Hiroshima ran to Nagasaki because it has larger Christian population. So they thought the Americans were not bombing because it's a Christian. The Americans wanted to test the effect of multiple exposure to radiation. So Nagasaki became ideal to see the effect of being bombed twice, some people, and basically bombed because it is a Christian by the Americans. Now that's...
It's interesting because I just saw a documentary, a little mini doc on radiation, and they referenced Hiroshima as the test tube for the impacts of radiation on human life. And
terrible.
it seems so evil to think that this is a primary motivation for the
But there are places of direct attack on Christianity. Oops. I wanted to elaborate on that. To elaborate on
2 more minutes.
Is that fair? The one before. All of this UFOs. UFOs are such a distraction from real science and distraction from the limitations of Earth, distraction from what Carl Sagan is saying, look guys, we have only this planet, so stop thinking about other things. UFOs are quite simply a trial hovercraft attempted by Nazi Germany with possibly not much success. US inherited it together with the attempted stealth bomber of Germany that never flew. The stealth bomber worked, but America still possibly is dabbling with it and nobody knows what conditions. So that's it. There are no aliens. The trouble is that when people go for aliens, it's a distraction from worrying about the world. This is what I'm saying. It's a distraction. And now there is this hoax about the alien, and there is the alien abduction. Now, a psychiatrist was talking to so-called survivals of alien abduction, And under hypnotism, he listened carefully, and he reached a conclusion. There is a common factor between all of them described. They were squeezed into something while going towards light, and at the end of the tunnel, they were mean creatures who put things in their noses and treated them badly. And he concluded that was flashback into birth. That's it. That's the whole thing. There is nobody was abducted, but some people have bad memory of being born. Now, people
We didn't ask for it.
they didn't ask for it. So, and then the other thing about these, about why do I combine them? I see the people who think about aliens today and Star Wars and what have you are the modern version of the previous ones who, like in the Middle East a long time ago, believed in the genie of the lamp, and Victorian girls who believed in the unicorn. There is a reason why they chose it. The people those poor people in the Middle East who were poor and helpless dreamt of power that comes easy without having to work. So what's easier than this genie who will say to him, I am your slave, I do whatever you want. And the Victorian girls who were restricted, have no freedom and deprived, they dreamt of a horse that flies with a phallic symbol on its head, and that's a unicorn. That's it. And today's people who don't fit on this planet, they dream of aliens. At some point, when my work was bad, I also was preaching about aliens. But then, when my work improved, I stopped talking about it. So, and the NASA engineers who want to protect their jobs talk about whatever, all this stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just wanted to pick up on a couple of points here, not necessarily the unicorns, but number one, what a marvelous example of a very particular kind of contextual theology that this is. And I think there is a job to be done now, once you kind of complete this work, at making it really useful for people, because I think you're right. I mean, a lot of people are in a situation where they think science has shown X, Y, and Z, and all of that excludes faith. Not only faith, I mean, okay, yes, we have an interest in maybe bringing people back to church, but that's not the point. I think, Deacon Simmons made the point a couple of times. It's about our humanity, our fundamental relational selves, that there's no joy or purpose ultimately if we cannot find that in getting along. And I thought one of the most moving things was Carl Sagan talking about how on this tiny speck of dust in the midst of blackness, how could we ever dare to fall out with each other? I mean, it makes no sense whatsoever. We have this shared reality and identity and purpose and everything, and that itself, with us, even though he's not a man of faith, but I mean, that was a kind of statement of faith in our own interdependence that even today people don't have that. So above and beyond, we're not trying to reconstruct Christendom. We just want people to be the best human beings they can be and achieve the most that they can, and that even that message is impaired by this scientism and this, which is very old now. It's what it's excluded. But what I thought was also fascinating, and particularly in the discussion, how we've come back round and we have picked, as I expected, up on themes from the beginning of the course. Talking about what do we do post-Christendom, and Jose's point about the kind of church that is in pilgrimage, and both holy and unholy, or holy and sinful. That back to the whole Ecclesia Crucis that we talked about at the beginning of the. As an alternative to the Church of Christendom is a Church of the Cross, a church that lives on the margins, that simultaneously reveals and hides like God does, and so forth. So I thought that was an interesting thing. But this whole thing about, how are human beings today born into the world, apart from through this tunnel of light and the taking a breath, which is extremely traumatic, and I said we didn't ask for it. There's a character, I think, in Dostoevsky, Kirillov, who says that. I didn't ask for this. We really have no freedom at all in that. But above and beyond that, the fact that we are just we now know all of us, that we are a speck of dust in the vast, infinite darkness of space. The fact that we know in a moment we can blow ourselves into non-existence. What does that do to the human consciousness? You know, we all of us have a very, very deep PTSD, right? We must, living with that reality. And so how do we respond to that? I mean, all of us, I mean, this is kind of, we've now taken marginalization to, we've scaled it up to infinity, right? All those zeros that you've presented to us, I mean, that's what that has done. We are marginalized to that degree. That's what that is all about. That's what the reality of Hiroshima and Nagasaki is all about. We have all been marginalized, fragilized, you know, whatever, and all the more we need faith, not less, you know. So, but how do we address that? And I think making all of that a practical, you know, kind of thing that we can work with, you know, because all power to you. You're able to master an awful lot of science in a very short space, but that's not going to be the message to our teenagers. You know, I mean, in a way it is, but we can't just rehearse the whole history of this science to them. How do we take that and liturgize that? How do we take that and make it part of the proclamation of the faith that we have and our fundamental conviction that every human being is in the image and likeness of God, and what that means in terms of relationship and everything. There's a job, I think, for all of us, and what a marvelous way of, you know, kind of concluding our time together to kind of look at these bigger questions. And I thank you for that. I mean, you've peppered the course with that, but I mean, you've kind of come out with a big bang.